and the lives of all Canadians.
So we have time for a short one. The honourable member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, my constituents are concerned, and their concerns are about this Asian Infrastructure Bank. And as my honourable colleague mentioned earlier, the reality is this government is going to invest $500 million into an Asian Infrastructure Bank that's going to create jobs for building pipelines and building coal-fired power plants in another part of the world. When my constituents are saying, Mr. Speaker, why can they not create jobs here in Canada? Why can we not have that? They've shut down the Energy East, which would have come through my riding and created jobs, and here they are sending money outside the country instead of putting it for jobs, good-paying, middle-class jobs in my riding, where they could put money in the carbon capture plant, which is capturing 98% of the greenhouse gases and putting it into the ground, capturing 100% of that sulfur and putting it into the ground. This is innovation. This is our advancing and a great asset for greenhouse gas capture. Why can you not put money into Canada?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy that the member talked about job creation, because that's clearly somewhere where we've succeeded, where they had failed for 10 years. We've created, in the last 2 years, 600,000 jobs in this country, most of them full-time, Mr. Speaker. That's something they, unfortunately, they failed to achieve, and I'm all about Canada's success. I wish they had succeeded in that 10 years. They didn't. They had the wrong plan. And when we look at the Asian Infrastructure Bank, this is part of Canada's re-engagement in the world. Most of the bank's projects are done in support with the World Bank and other international institutions, such as the Asian Development Bank. Is he suggesting we should withdraw from international institutions? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Carleton.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address one allegation sometimes made against the Liberal government and other far-left governments around the world that I think is false. Some have accused governments of like this of really having it in for the rich, for wanting to get tough on people who have a lot of money, and unfairly so. That, even Winston Churchill once said that the inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries. And I want to say that in this case, this very rare case, even the great Winston Churchill was wrong. Socialism and big government policies do not equally spread around the miseries to everyone. No, they spread them around in a way that would better be described in George Orwell's Animal Farm. They spread them around in a manner that is equal, but equal in a special way. Equal in that everybody is equal, but some are more equal than others. No, Mr. Speaker, this government which subscribes to put it generously, social democratic policies, socialist policies, does not disparage those who have lots of money. Rather, they have a different view of how money should be distributed. While we on this side believe in the free market, which distributes wealth based on merit, they believe that wealth should be distributed by government, that people should be allowed to get wealthy as long as they do so through the government. In a government-directed economy, people get rich by having the best lobbyist. In a free market economy, people get ahead by having the best product or service. We've seen this borne out. Strategas Research, a company out of the United States, did a carefully calculated correlation between the money spent on lobbying in Washington and the amount of government spending in Washington. They found that as government becomes a larger share of the U.S. economy, the number of dollars companies spent on lobbying went up almost on a one-for-one basis. Why? Because business goes where the money is, and if all the money is in the government, well, then they invest in getting that money. They invest in getting a return by purchasing political power. And when government decides who gets what, then those with money buy power and then transform that power into yet more money. Now, what are some of the ways that one can do this? One can, for example, hire a lobbyist to get a subsidy. Company X spends $10 million on lobbying and gets a $400 million interest-free loan. Pretty good return on investment. And that's how you get a return on investment in a government-directed economy. You purchase political power and then hope that that political power results in more money. In a free market economy, you invest in creating a better product or service that improves other people's lives, which they buy voluntarily with their own money. And then you get a return by making somebody else's life better off. In a free market economy based on voluntary exchange, the only way to get ahead is by offering something to someone that is worth more than it costs them. So let's give some practical examples of where our friends across the way have been extremely generous to the rich, contrary to allegations that they are hard on the rich, allegations which, in fairness and in a spirit of nonpartisanship, I speak to dispel here on the floor of the House of Commons. One, $400 million interest-free loan to Bombardier, which, if it is ever paid back, will be done so on the most generous terms. Bombardier is controlled by a billionaire family that has 53% of the votes at a shareholder meeting, even though they have a minority of the shares, multiple voting shares. Now, that company could have raised more money by issuing more stocks, but what would have happened then? The majority control of the billionaire Bombardier Baudouin family would have been diluted, and they would have lost their majority and thus their control of the company. And so this government bailed out the billionaires and saved their control of that company so that they can continue to make decisions and pay themselves exorbitant salaries, even when they have bad results. In fact, after the government kicked in this money, the executives of the company, some of them billionaires, paid themselves a 50% increase in compensation, all while laying off 14,000 people. We now know that many of the jobs that are going to be created in the future are actually going to be south of the border. And the control of the intellectual property will be in the hands of Europeans. So there really was no Canadian public interest in this move. It was all about helping this billionaire family. So it is not true, and I reject the allegation against the party opposite that they are tough on the rich. That is unfair, and I reject it, and I will stand up against those who disparage the government in that way.
Hear, hear.
Then there is the infrastructure bank. Now, municipalities across the country have gotten smart about these construction companies. For years, these companies would come in, place a bid, promise to build a bridge or a road for a certain price, and then after they got the contract, they'd come back and say, whoops, sorry, it's going to cost a lot more than we thought, you'll have to pay us some more. So municipalities have said, no, we're not doing that anymore. From now on, we're paying you a fixed price contract. You build it for the price agreed upon, and if it goes over, no problem, you pay for it. And that has bred discipline into the process of procurement. Now the government wants to take away that discipline with loans and loan guarantees backed up by taxpayers that will protect investors when they participate in infrastructure mega projects. So they build a monstrous bridge or transit project or something else, and the project goes over budget or its revenues fall short. Well, then that company will just turn over and use the loan guarantee provided by this multi-billion-dollar taxpayer-backed bank to protect them. So taxpayers get all the risk and investors get all the profit. This whole scheme was cooked up at the Shangri-La Hotel, one of the swankiest places in Toronto, where the heads of literally hundreds of billions of dollars of investment firms met with ministers of this government in secret to craft all the terms. They decided how Canadian tax dollars would be spent. There were no consultations on this with taxpayers, the people who actually have to pay for it, but those who would benefit were right at the table writing the policy for the government. That consultation and the generous way with which the government carried it out proves once again that the allegation against this government of having it in for the rich and being hard on the wealthy is absolutely false. And I again dispel that false allegation. And now we have the Asian Infrastructure Bank. Now, this is a $500 million contribution from Canadian taxpayers to a foreign bank to build infrastructure in other parts of the country. Now, all of us at times have supported foreign aid for the world's poor, but this is not even intended to help the world's poor. It's meant to help the world's rich. Wealthy investors who build pipelines that would never get approved here in Canada, or other infrastructure in other parts of the world, will have their investments protected by $100 billion of tax money from around the world, so that if those projects don't meet their financial expectations, well, that's just fine, because foreign taxpayers from around the world will have to pick up the tab for the incompetent decisions of international investors. More welfare for the wealthy, and in this case, the foreign wealthy, those who are not even in Canada. And no, we cannot say this has anything to do with promoting trade links. In fact, the principal government participating in this Asian Infrastructure Bank in China has said that the purpose of the bank is to re-establish the Silk Road, the trading route from China westward, away from Canada. So the infrastructure that will be built could not even possibly facilitate commerce with Canadians, because we're on the wrong side of the world to benefit from any of it. So again, the government has cozied up with the world's wealthy elite in order to provide taxpayer-funded benefits to those who have the most. Now we move on to other decisions here at home. You know, this government has decided it's going to raise taxes, and they claim that it's only going to affect the wealthy. Well, it seems that it affects everyone but the wealthy. The Fraser Institute calculated that 87% of middle-class taxpayers are paying more in tax since this government took office, on average $800 more. We found in the first annual financial report to be released since this government's policies were implemented, the first annual report from Finance Canada showed that the wealthiest Canadians actually paid less in the 2016-17 tax year, because they were able to successfully move their money around and avoid the tax increases that this government has imposed on people. Now, this brings me to the conduct and judgment of the Minister of Finance himself. We've now learned that he was one of the individuals who moved his income in order to avoid paying the taxes that he was imposing on others. He sold his shares in Morneau Chapelle in November 30th of 2015, almost exactly a month before his own tax increases would have taken effect. So by selling his shares at that time, he paid capital gains tax under the lower rate, rather than just waiting an extra 5 or 6 weeks and paying the higher rates that he said were so fair. On principle, put aside whether or not the minister acted ethically in that matter. On principle, he should have led by example. If he really believed that Canadians should pay higher taxes, that people like him should pay more, then why could he not have just waited 5 weeks to make that $10 million sale and realize his capital gains in the 2016 year, so that he would pay the same higher taxes that he applied to everyone else? No, he was very careful to make sure that those taxes would not apply to him. And on the same point, he has huffed and puffed and says it is so unfair of us to ask him questions about his shares. Mr. Speaker, in any public company, a corporate executive could be asked those kinds of questions at a board meeting or at a shareholder annual meeting. In fact, corporate executives are required to publicly disclose the shares that they buy and sell, and if they sell them at a time that is near the release of earnings reports, for example, there are lots of red flags raised and lots of questions answered. And they are accountable for answering those questions. So for this minister to suggest that it is somehow unreasonable for Her Majesty's loyal opposition to demand he explain the timing of the sale of shares that he made in the immediate lead-up to the tabling of tax documents on the floor of the House of Commons is a little rich, quite literally, coming from him. You know, and I will let me talk not just about the hypocrisy of his conduct in this area, but also about the judgment. In the corporate world, they have something called blackouts. Typically, officers and directors of public companies try to avoid selling shares in the immediate lead-up to the release of earnings results, even in cases where those results are anticipated accurately. Even if the guidance issued by the company at the beginning of the quarter turns out to be accurate at the end of the quarter, even if all the analysts correctly predict the earnings per share that are going to be released at the end of the quarter, even if there's nothing really unexpected that comes out in those earnings results, it is not good form for a CEO or another executive to sell shares a week before those results are released. It is better form for that executive to say, you know what, I'm going to wait till 3 or 4 business days after the earnings results are released so that there can be no doubt whatsoever that everyone had exactly the same information when I sold my shares. The minister admitted on the floor of the House of Commons yesterday that some of the contents of the document that he tabled December 7th, 2015, were confidential, that it was kept tight within a small group at Finance Canada, that those materials were sensitive and therefore could not be shared around. If that was the case, then surely he ought not be trading on the stock market in 6 or 7 or 8 days before the public release of that document. He should have had the competence and the judgment to avoid the real or perhaps just perceptual problems that go along with that conduct. These are exactly the kinds of questions and criticisms that the opposition is expected to raise, and it would be political malpractice for us not to raise them. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, there are places around the world where such questions are not asked of our leaders, of the leaders, where leaders can say, that's out of bounds, you can't ask me that, none of your business. There are places like that. They are the most miserable places to live on planet Earth. I am so proud to live in a country where we have the ability to ask these kinds of questions, because it is our job on this side of the House of Commons to ensure the government is always acting in the public interest and not in the private interest of any individual. And I will say this, going back to the point of hypocrisy. The Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have been crying a lot of crocodile tears about the questions that they face over their own financial decisions and the way that they have, the amount of tax that they have paid and the way that they have protected their own family fortunes. You know what? These are the questions that they invited when, over the last 3 years, they engaged in a bloody-minded campaign of class warfare, where they went out and started attacking people, including, in their own words, and I quote, wealthy doctors and others who used fancy accounting schemes. A privileged few, they Liberals said, were avoiding paying their fair share. They implied that there was a group of people who were getting ahead and not paying enough, and they disparaged those people. And now the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister expect everyone to have sympathy for them because people are asking questions about their finances. Well, Mr. Speaker, when you single out a group of honest, hardworking, law-abiding Canadians and attack them for following the rules and working hard and succeeding, then people are going to ask questions as to whether you live up to your own standards. And that is exactly what we have been doing, Mr. Speaker. So, to conclude, this government has no problem supporting the wealthy and the privileged. In fact, the government has been very, very generous to that group of people. But we on this side of the House of Commons will continue to stand on the side of merit, of free enterprise, and an economy that allows anyone who's prepared to work hard, be smart and industrious, to get ahead while making the lives of other people better at the same time. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first off, let me just kind of provide some counter. The member across the way tries to say something that's just not true. This government did, in fact, have a special tax increase on Canada's 1% wealthiest. There's no denying that. That is factual. In fact, the member knows full well he voted against that particular measure. Now, what we've heard time and time again from members opposite is a character assassination that's been done and conducted against the Minister of Finance. I found a wonderful quote, and I think this is a quote that is really appropriate, and I'd like to read it into the record. This is what the member opposite said when he was in government. I would encourage him, and I quote, I would encourage him, if he has the integrity, if he has the courage to take the exact statement that he just made, walk outside in front of the media and repeat those allegations. Who said that? It is my bet that he will not do it. Mr. Speaker, when we look at the character assassination, I've heard words such as a jail, criminal activities being leveled against the Minister of Finance. My question to the member across the way, would he not hold the same standard that he held when he was in opposition, when he talked about how easy it is to use parliamentary privilege to say something inside the House and not having the courage to say the same sort of things outside of the House when it comes to character assassination?
Wow. For Carleton.
He just used a bunch of words that I have never used. He used the word jail and criminal and other things. I have never used such words. Never have I used such words. Never have I used such words. So that member. Yeah.
I'm trying to hear the answer from the honourable member from Carleton, but I'm hearing shouting from both sides, and it's overpowering. I just want to remind the honourable members that I'm very interested in what the honourable member has to say. The honourable member for Carleton.
It's a very strange course of events when the government is using words about an allegation relating to their own minister that the opposition is not using. He almost wants us to make those allegations. We haven't. Secondly, the Minister of Finance told me to go outside. I said, come with me. Let's go together. I'll repeat the same facts and questions out there as I did in here. But he was like the kid, the schoolboy who challenged someone to a fight and then didn't show up to the bike racks. Okay? I went outside. I repeated my questions and my facts and stated the same things out there and the same things in here, which are questions and facts. These are legitimate questions and legitimate facts, and the finance minister could have done a lot better a job of dealing with these problems if he had just answered basic questions. Basic, simple questions to which he would obviously have answers, like, when did he sell his shares? We asked it literally dozens of times this week, and as late as yesterday, he was claiming not to have any knowledge. That was an obvious question to which he could have given an obvious answer, and he would have done himself a great service if he had, and if he starts beginning to answer questions, he will do himself a great service.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I resisted the temptation, which came to me frequently through the member from Carleton's speech, to ask about relevance to Bill C-63. He did occasionally, in fairness to the member, touch on things that are actually in Bill C-63. But I am going to ask a more partisan question because this morning, going through the daily press, those media sources that are generally cheerleaders for his party, people like Terence Corcoran and the editorials in the Globe and Mail, papers and columnists who uniformly endorsed the Conservatives in the last election, are wondering if the Conservatives haven't gone out too far without evidence. And in this constant attack, I'm not going to defend the Finance Minister's decisions on many things, but if he can't get the cheerleading choir of the Conservative Party in the Globe and Mail and the Financial Post to agree that he's on to something, would he consider changing the channel and actually talking about the bill before us?
The honourable member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, we will not stop asking the relevant and important questions that are the duty of an official opposition to ask. Our job is to hold the government to account to ensure that not only its policies but its conduct are appropriate. In so doing, I have stated facts and asked questions and played my role as an opposition critic, and I will keep doing so.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Glengarry Prescott Russell.
I want to thank the member from Carleton for his speech. I want to focus on the first part of his speech. He spoke about the infrastructure bank, and he spoke about how all the risk would be put on the taxpayer. And if I recall, just 1 week before the election, he announced a fund in Ottawa, and he should remember this. It was called the Public Transit Fund, which would be administered under Triple P Canada. So Triple P Canada issues private sector funds, taxpayer funds, and obviously the proponent of the project would issue his funds as well. So I'm wondering, has his mind changed since July 27th, 2015, when he announced the Public Transit Fund, which would be administered under the PPP Canada, which we know is a Triple P, and obviously all the risk is on the taxpayer. So he was just complaining about the infrastructure bank. So all I want to know, has he seen the enlightenment of not issuing Triple Ps?
Well, member for Carleton.
I strongly support private sector investment in infrastructure in a way that puts the risk on the investor. And that's exactly what we did in government. We created infrastructure deals that ensured that the investor would suffer the losses in the event that the project went over budget or revenue came in below expectations. That's exactly how public-private partnerships should work. In fact, the only real benefit to having a public-private partnership is to shift risk off the taxpayer and on to the private sector investor. What, in fact, this government is doing is exactly the opposite. They're shifting the risk off of the investor and onto the taxpayer, and that is what we oppose.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Thornhill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for another exceptional speech here in the House. I've asked him to elaborate a little bit. The Finance Minister's invitation to go outside, to go to the lobby and restate what he suggested were allegations that didn't refer at all to the fact that they were facts and questions. The other half of that invitation was that if my colleague did, and he did, and the Finance Minister didn't accompany him, but if he did, he would face the full weight of the law and the legal proceedings which the Minister's great wealth would enable. I wonder if my colleague could speak about the fact that the threats that have been made from the Prime Minister, from the Finance Minister, the legal chill that they are trying to impose on the questions that are being legitimately and logically and democratically asked in this House.
The honourable member for Carleton.
There's no question that the Minister is, in fact, trying to use his prodigious wealth to silence his critics. There's no question about that. I have stated facts and asked questions on the floor of the House of Commons, which I have repeated outside of the House. And, you know, this Minister, instead of just answering them here, has said that he wants to sue people who ask those questions. Mr. Speaker, in this House, we are all equal, regardless of the wealth that we inherited or brought to this place. We are all equal in our ability to conduct debate, to ask questions, and demand accountability. And that is all that we have sought from this Minister. Unfortunately, he has made problems so much worse for himself through his absolute unwillingness to answer the most basic questions on the floor of the House of Commons or anywhere else. He's had all week to do it, he fails to do it, and instead he goes around using the Bay Street tactic of threatening lawsuits against anybody who disagrees with him.
We have time for a very quick question. Questions and comments? The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Carleton has introduced a new phrase into our lexicon today, political malpractice, in quotes. Fascinating. He also says that the Minister of Finance is using prodigious wealth to silence people. I recall that very member in the government benches, day after day, refusing to answer direct questions about a certain Mr. Nigel Wright, who I do think had prodigious wealth, and wrote a check arguably to silence someone. How does he feel about that instance today?
For Ottawa Carleton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think a lot of people are looking back on those quaint old times in the previous government when people had to resign because they spent $17 on a glass of orange juice, or because I'm sorry, I overstated it, $16, or because they, on behalf of a constituent, called a quasi-judicial body in order to try and help a constituent with a problem. And those were the days when ministers held themselves to the highest possible ethical standards. And now we live in an era where a minister can own shares secretly in a company that he regulates, introduce bill on pensions when he owns a pension company, where that minister can actually tell us that it's illegitimate to question his sale of shares right before introducing a tax measure. Mr. Speaker, times have changed for the worse.
Statement by members, déclaration de député. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for La Salle, Aymar Verdun. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to pay tribute to 4 athletes in my riding who distinguished themselves during the World Martial Arts Championship in Dublin, in Ireland, in October. Antoine, Felix, Kingsley, Ruth Ann, as well as their sensei Danny Griffith, represented Canada, and they brought home a total of 11 medals. Felix, 10 years old, was crowned world champion in kata soft, and Ruth Ann, world champion for soft kata in the 35 and over category.
The karatekas from LaSalle have reason to be proud of their performance. They've been practicing for a number of years now at the sides of their sensei Danny Griffith at the School of Karate Kenpo Danny Griffith School in LaSalle. Mr. Speaker, it's the result of a number of years of effort, work, and perseverance, and I am proud to pay tribute to them today in this House. Thank you.
For Sarnia Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, I want to protest an ill-thought-out bill that is passing through Parliament here on the Hill. The bill that is bad is called C-45. It has so many flaws it just shouldn't survive. The grits will allow 4 pot plants in each dwelling, regardless of how bad each place will be smelling. With mold, ventilation as issues unplanned, this bill will not keep pot from our children's hand. There are more new infractions within this new rule that our courts will be flooded, as will every school. With drug-impaired driving and challenges there, the doubling of traffic deaths, and Liberals don't care. The provinces and police in every town have all asked the Liberals to slow this bill down. With nearly 200 more days left till the day, nobody but our party stands in the way. We hope that the Senate will do its true deed and keep our great country safe from all the weed.
L'honorable député de Pontiac.
The honourable member for Pontiac. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are in the middle of 16 days of activism against sex-based violence, an initiative that will wrap up on December 10th. During these 16 days, activities to raise awareness, share experiences, and denounce violence against women are being held all across the world. I invite my fellow Canadians, both male and female, to participate in this initiative. In the days leading up to the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, on December 6th, I would like to highlight the importance of the work carried out for women by organizations in my region. I'm thinking in particular of the Association des Femmes Immigrantes de l'Outaouais, l'Entourelle, la Table Autonome des Aînés des Collines, la Clinique des Femmes de l'Outaouais, the Centre Mechtilde, Agir Outaouais, de Calex, de la vallée de Gatineau, le comptoir Saint-Pierre, de Fort-Coulonge, Alfam, Haute-Gatineau, la Maison Libérale, and I could go on. These groups carry out important work to advance the public interest and I thank them from the bottom of my heart.
Speaker, today marks World AIDS Day. Since the virus was identified in 1984, it has proven to be one of the most destructive pandemics in history, resulting in the deaths of over 35 million people globally. Today, we take a moment to mourn those who have been lost. While an AIDS diagnosis originally meant a death sentence, scientific research and the work of dedicated advocates, caregivers, and patients has brought a powerful message of prevention and critical destigmatization of the disease. Today, those living with HIV who have access to treatment and maintain an undetectable viral load do not transmit the virus to their sexual partners. This is a great achievement. However, it is still estimated 7 Canadians are affected each day with HIV, often from the most vulnerable populations. Today, I call on the government to expand the federal initiative on HIV/AIDS, create equal access to treatment for infected Canadians, and stop the practice of banning blood donations by men who have sex with men. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Madawaska-Restigouche. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great pleasure to address this House to tell you about a marvellous initiative in my riding of Madawaska-Restigouche.
A number of communities in East Restigouche have gotten together to plan and organize a regional winter festival. Mr. Speaker, what makes this initiative so special is that Acadian, Irish, Scottish, and First Nation communities are all working together to organize this event. Toute une gamme
A wide array of cultural and sporting activities have been planned. Under the theme of Celebrate Our Cultures, musicians will warm hearts, storytellers will captivate young and old with Mi'kmaq, Acadian, and other stories.
Full event. Of course, my honourable colleagues in this chamber are also invited. Félicitations aux
Congratulations to the organizers of Balmoral, Charlotte, Dalhousie, Eel River Crossing, and Eel River Bar. And in the meantime, I would like to wish happy holidays to all Canadians, especially Madawaska-Restigouche. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The current government must respect citizens of the regions who have a community life and a daily reality different from those of people in large cities. Given the evolution of information technologies and the fast-moving deployment of digital services, regional medias must adapt to the reality of the market. There are a variety of assistance programs for various media, but nothing for written press. It's in newsrooms that a large number of the real news is produced, and in the era of fake news, it's important to have access to the truth. The right to information is a crucial element for all Canadians. For example, in my riding of Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier, I have a weekly newspaper called Le Courrier de Portneuf. This cooperative is presently in a precarious situation. They are doing much more with much less. The Minister of Heritage must take the problem seriously, have the decency to meet with the Fédération Nationale des Communications and find a solution for the viability of regional weekly newspapers. Citizens of the regions must be respected. They also have a right to information on their community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Sydney, Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to commend the Cape Breton Regional Hospital Foundation and all those who support the annual Cape Breton Regional Hospital fundraisers. On November 18th, the Festival of Greens raised $120,000 for Operation Heart. Because of these amazing donations, the hospital will have a new anesthesia machine to ensure incredible results in all the 11,000 surgical procedures that take place in the hospital every year. In addition to this fundraiser, a record-breaking $1,016,000 was fundraised in partnership with local radio stations on October 5th on their annual Radio Day event. Mr. Speaker, the contributions of Cape Bretoners to this cause go toward vital hospital elements, like the Cape Breton Cancer Centre treating 150 to 200 patients a day, the neonatal intensive unit that takes care of the little ones in our pediatrics unit, mental health services, and so much more. I commend all the volunteers, organizers, businesses, and donors that make these events such a great success and do so much for our community.
The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge the recipients of the Canada 150 Constituency Awards in my riding of Northumberland, Peterborough South, all of whom represent community heroism. Some of them